I live in a little 4-unit building that backs up against a strip of woods. It's not like deep wilderness, but it's substantial enough that I don't feel dishonest calling it a forest. Over on the other side is where the city ends. There's kind of an industrial area and bus yard. This happened in late summer. I work front desk at a gym and I was closing that night, so I didn't get home until around 10. I parked, got out, and was heading to the building entrance when I heard something odd. A dog was barking from the woods. It wasn't a deep bark. It sounded like a small dog or puppy, maybe 40 to 50 yards into the trees. The first thought that went through my mind was that someone was walking their dog, but the more I thought about it, that didn't make any sense. These woods didn't have any trails. It's just kind of like raw land. I stood there in the lot with my keys in hand looking toward the edge of the trees. It barked a few more times in a row, then just cut off. That was it. I got up to my apartment, heated up some leftovers, scrolled on Instagram, and started dozing off. I had my bedroom window open, and out in the darkness, I could hear the dog barking again. I've always been soft when it comes to animals. Every time I heard the bark, I pictured some lost little dog scared out there, and I started to feel like an asshole for trying to ignore it. I couldn't handle the guilt I was feeling. So I got out of bed, got dressed again, then dug a flashlight out of the kitchen drawer and changed the battery. Then I left my apartment, walked downstairs and toward the woods through the lot. When I got to the edge, I just stood there listening, shining the light into the trees. Then I heard it again, somewhere ahead of me, maybe 40 yards away. I pointed the flashlight in the direction I'd heard it and started walking into the woods. It was slow going. I was constantly stepping over logs and branches and changing direction to get around trees. The further away from the lot I got, the more isolated it felt. It was total darkness. The only sounds breaking up the silence of the woods were my footsteps crunching through the brush and the periodic barking of the dog. I was getting closer. When I was maybe 15 yards away, I started calling out to it. I was gentle about it because I didn't want to startle it. That's when the barking just stopped. It went totally quiet. I made my way to where I'd last heard the bark, then stood there scanning my light around the forest. I tried calling out again as gently as I could, but it was dead quiet. That's when I heard this low growl behind me. I spun around with the flashlight, and at first I couldn't locate where it was coming from. Then, my flashlight landed on a downed tree, and that's when I saw it. In the space underneath, between the log and the ground, there was a naked man on all fours covered in mud. He was peering up from underneath it like he was trying to hide. His hair was wet and stuck to his forehead, and his eyes looked terrified. He was baring his teeth at me and growling. It took me so by surprise, I yelled out and stumbled backwards. That's when he started gnashing his teeth at me, foaming at the mouth and lunging in my direction. He was barking and spitting, and you could hear his teeth clicking when he'd bite. I don't think I've ever moved that fast in my life. I was tripping over branches, slamming into trees, just trying to get back to my building. I could hear him behind me, but I didn't look back. I burst out of the woods and sprinted directly to the front entrance. I got inside, slammed the door shut, and ran up the stairs back to my apartment. I called 911. They got there pretty fast, maybe 10 minutes. I watched from the window as the cops shined flashlights into the woods. They walked the tree line for a while, then went further in. After maybe 20 minutes, there was a knock at my door. One of the officers asked me to walk him through what had happened. He was polite, but I could tell he didn't believe me. They hadn't found anyone. He kept circling back to the same question, asking if I was sure I hadn't just seen a dog. Before they left, they told me that there was a big drug problem in the city on the other side of the woods. Meth and other stuff that puts people out of their minds, then they wander into the woods and act strange. That was their best guess. Then they left. I never heard that barking sound after that night, but even if I had, you will never see me go into those woods, ever again. I'm in my 60s now, and I don't hunt anymore, but when I was in my 30s, I used to go out once or twice a season. Just deer on a small piece of private land a friend of my uncle owned. The property was not huge, but big enough that once you got out there, it felt like you were in the middle of nowhere. It was all clearly posted, and only a few people had permission. Me, my uncle, and the landowner's son. This was pre-season, early fall. No orange, no rifle. I was just going out there to fix the stand. I'd been meaning to replace some rotten boards the year before and never got around to it. I took the quad in with some scrap lumber and a small tool bag. When I got out there, I carried the lumber from the quad over to the stand and piled it underneath along with the tools. When I got up into the stand, right away I could tell someone had been using it. There were a bunch of miscellaneous items strewn across the platform. An old trail cam, a rusted hatchet leaning in the corner, and cigarette butts all over the place. None of it was mine, and no one in our group smoked. The only thought I had was that he had allowed someone else out there that I didn't know about. I picked up the trail cam, cigarette butts, and the hatchet and piled them on the railing of the wall. I planned on taking them back with me when I was done and asking the landowner if he knew whose they were. On my way down from the stand, I accidentally knocked the hatchet off. It fell down next to the tools. I left it there but made a mental note of it so I wouldn't forget it later. Then I got to work. I hauled the lumber up one piece at a time, pried the old ones off, then nailed the new ones on. The woods were so quiet that every hammer hit felt extremely loud. After 15 minutes or so and a bunch of trips up and down from the stand, I was bent over replacing one of the last boards when I heard it. Footsteps right below me. I straightened up and stepped forward enough to look down past the edge of the platform. There was a guy standing at the bottom of the tree looking up at me. He had a beard and looked like he was maybe in his 50s. He was all camoed out, but didn't come off like he was a hunter. He just had a backpack with him, no other gear. Something wasn't right. I said hello and asked if I could help him. There was this long pause where he just says nothing, looks at me, then at the quad, then around the area like he's checking to see if anyone else was out there. Meanwhile, it's totally silent. I ask him again, how can I help him? He says nothing. I told him that this was private property and asked if he was a friend of the landowner, Dave. Then, like a switch flipped, I see this guy notice the hatchet that had fallen next to the tool bag. He picks it up, comes toward the tree, and starts climbing up the nailed-on wooden rungs. I started yelling at him to get down and that if he kept climbing toward me, I would hit him with the hammer. That's when he starts wildly swinging the hatchet. He was reaching above his head and wailing on the entrance of the platform, chopping into it. It forced me to back away. He gets to the landing, and I'm literally about to hit him with the hammer when he grabs the trail cam off the railing and just jumps down to the ground. The next thing I know, the guy is running off into the woods. I took my phone out and called the landowner. He didn't answer. Then I got down, grabbed my tools, got on the quad, and got the hell out of there. Dave, the landowner, called me back later. He sounded confused when I told him what had happened, said he hadn't given anyone else permission to be out there and didn't recognize anybody by the description I gave him. Then he had me call the game warden. The only conclusion I can come to is that he was some kind of poacher or something, and what was on that trail cam was something he really didn't want anyone else to see. Bait piles, out-of-season kills, maybe trespassing on other posted land. maybe something even darker. Whatever it was worth attacking me with a hatchet and risk getting nailed in the head with a hammer to keep secret. I'm not sure this fits the kind of stuff people usually want to read here, but this is the scariest thing that's ever happened to me. About 5 years ago, I was in my early 30s, living outside a mid-sized city. I love hiking and primitive camping. It's pretty warm there year-round, so every other weekend or so, I would try to find a new hike for an overnight camp. The homelessness had gotten noticeably worse in the area over the previous couple years. I mention it only because seeing homeless camps on or near these hiking trails became pretty common, and it pertains to this story. So this one weekend, I decided to do an overnight hike that I hadn't been on yet. It wasn't a state park or anything, just a recommended trail I found online. I parked in the lot at the mouth of the trail and headed in. It was late afternoon, still plenty of light. The early part of the trail is pretty open, but maybe 30 or 40 minutes in, it starts to feel more closed in. Thicker trees and less road noise. Isolation. That's when I saw the camp. It was off to the right, maybe 30 feet back from the main trail. What stuck out about it was that it looked neat. There was a tent with a blue tarp rigged over the top like a rainfly, ropes tied cleanly around the nearby trunks. There were plastic crates stacked up in one spot, then some shelves and a cooler. Then I saw the guy. He had this intense look on his face, like I had no business being out there, just staring me down as I walked by. It was awkward, but pretty soon I was too far down the trail to see him anymore. The rest of the walk was fine. I found a spot I liked, set up my tent, and got a little fire going as the light went down. Once it got properly dark, I heated up one of my meals, ate, then just sat watching the fire burn down, drinking a beer. As I'm sitting there, half zoned out, staring at the fire, I hear a scream. It sounded far away, but what was unnerving about it was that it was very clearly the scream of a man in what sounded like horrific pain. I got up and turned in a slow circle, looking off into the dark in the direction it had come from. There was nothing, no light in the distance, no more screams, nothing. After a few minutes of standing there with my heart thumping, I sat back down. I told myself that if I heard anything again, I'd pack up and hike out. When I didn't hear anything else for the next hour, I killed the fire and crawled into my tent to go to bed. In the morning, I broke down the tent, packed my stuff, and headed back out toward the lot. On the way, as I was passing the spot where I'd seen the man's camp, I decided I would offer him one of my extra camping meals. I had more at home, and he needed it more than I did. I started making my way off the trail toward the camp when very quickly I could tell something was wrong. Everything that had been neat and organized the day before was now trashed. The tarp that had been stretched tight over the tent was now hanging down. Plastic crates were knocked over and stuff was everywhere. The tent itself was half cut open. It was a disaster zone. I stood there in the middle of it, confused. I could not believe it was the same camp as the day before. It was that bad. I called out a hello. No one answered. I stepped forward to get a better look through the slash in the tent, and that's when I saw the feet. Bare ankles and dirty socks laying in the tent. They weren't moving. I didn't know if this person was sleeping or what. I didn't want to disturb them, but something was obviously wrong and I felt like it was the right thing to do to check on them. I stepped forward and reached out to pull the tent fabric back when I heard something from my right. Someone stepped on a branch. I spun around and saw a woman who had stepped out from between two trees. She was small and skinny and dressed in layers of dirty clothing. She was staring right at me with one hand behind her back. I held up my hands, trying to show that I wasn't a threat. I told her I just wanted to drop off some food and make sure everyone was okay. She pointed back toward the trail, told me to go, and kept glancing toward the tent opening, then back at me like she was trying to gauge how much I'd seen. I turned my head and looked at the feet again. They hadn't moved. As I'm looking in, I hear her take another step toward me. When I look back at her, she stops. I set down the camping meal, raised my hands, and stepped back, telling her that I was leaving. Then I backed out of the woods, got back on the trail, and jogged until I was back in the lot. I got 911 on the line and they told me they'd send someone. I waited there in the lot for an hour and nobody came. I called again and they told me someone was on the way. I continued to wait, but nobody ever came. I had other things I needed to get back for, and honestly, I felt stupid, like I'd overreacted. Maybe that guy was just sleeping and I'd imagined the worst. After 2.5 hours of waiting, I left and drove home. I tried looking up several times to see if there was ever anything in the news about it, but there never was. Maybe that lady was just protecting someone who was strung out and in bad shape and didn't want the cops involved. Or maybe that day I walked away from a crime scene.